Hello. Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, this is a literature and English class. The last time we talked about drama, we looked at the types of drama and relevant terms that are used in drama. So, in today's lesson, we would be talking about prose, which is another genre of literature. Remember, we mentioned three genres of literature, which include drama, prose, and poetry. So this afternoon, we would be looking at prose and possibly poetry, if time permits us. Okay. Looking at the screen, we have the various objectives that we are supposed to cover. Here, you should be able to differentiate between types of prose, the various types of prose. You should be able to identify the category to which each of the prescribed texts belongs. That is the recommended text that we are expected to read. At the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify the narrative techniques used in each of the prescribed texts. You are to determine the author's narrative style. You should be able to distinguish between one type of character from another. You should be able to determine the thematic preoccupation of the author of the prescribed text after you must have read the text. You should be able to indicate the plot of the novel and then identify the temporal and spatial setting of the novel, identify the temporal, okay, oh, that's a repetition, and then relate the prescribed text to real life situations. These are the objectives that we are expected to cover after reading each of the recommended texts. Now let's go to prose proper, prose as a genre of literature. We know, of course, that prose is a literary work of art that is written in chapters and paragraphs. It is a literary work of art that is written in chapters and paragraphs. Prose, of course, comes from the Latin. Yeah, it comes from the Latin prosa oratio, which means straightforward. Just like drama comes from the ancient Greek, prose comes from Latin, okay? And it is a literary work of art that is written in chapters and paragraphs. And then prose is also under fiction. Remember that literature is broadly divided into two, fiction and non-fiction, of which prose, of course, has the two features. Some aspects of prose fall under fiction, and some prose works fall under non-fiction. So under prose, we have types of prose. There are under types of prose, we have fiction and non-fiction. Under fiction, we have the novel, we have the novella, we have the novelette, and we have short stories. When you look at this novella, a novel is expected to have at least 4,000 words. 4,000 words. That is 4,000 words and above. Okay. And a novella should have at least 18,000 words, but not up to 40,000, not up to 40,000. A novel has 40,000 words and above, and then a novella has about 18,000 words, okay? But not up to 40,000 words like the novel. And then for you to look at a piece of work and call it a novelette, it means it has above 7,500 words. Yes, but not up to 18,000 words. Okay, so the difference is just in the length or the volume of the works. And then you have the short stories there. You have the short stories there. Some of them 1,000 words and above, some 5,000 words and so on, but not up to 7,500 words. You may have a single piece that tells a short story. You may have a combination of short stories put together in an anthology. And then we have the nonfiction. Nonfiction. Under nonfiction, we have biography. We have biography, which is a life story of someone written by someone else, written by another person. Your life story written by another person. When someone else writes your story, that is what? Your biography. But when you write your story yourself, if you write your story yourself, that is autobiography. So autobiography is your story written by you, while biography is your story written by another person. And then we have another type of prose which falls under nonfiction too, which is the memoir. The memoir. What is the memoir? The memoir is similar to a biography, is similar to an autobiography. It tells a story, but it focuses on a given activity. It focuses on a given activity about someone. Probably there is an aspect of your life that you find maybe quite interesting or not really interesting, but you wouldn't want to forget it. You always want to go back to that memory. Okay, that is put together in a memoir. Hello, and then we have another type of nonfiction, which is regarded as faction. There is a noise in the background. Please, if your background is noisy, mute your audio if your background is noisy. Mute your speaker, please. Okay, let's continue. We are still talking about nonfiction under prose. Okay, as a faction is a combination of facts and fiction. Okay, it's a situation where you bring a real life situation and you try to create some interesting but not true events, just to make the story maybe appear more interesting or maybe to convey your message to your audience or to your readers. And then we have the diary. The diary is another type of prose, is another type of nonfiction, which is about someone's life. There are people who are very good at keeping diaries where they take a record of their life events, especially notable events, very important events that take place in their lives. They put it up in their diaries. There are some works of literature that we read, which are typical examples of diaries, like Ferdinand Oyuno's Houseboy. Houseboy is the title of a novel, Houseboy by Ferdinand Oyuno. If you read that novel, you'll find out that it is someone's diary put together. Okay, it's an example of a diary. And then we have epistolary writing. Epistolary writing from the word epistle. Epistolary writing is like a novel in form of a letter. You are reading a novel, and in that novel, you are reading letters written by characters in that story. A good example of this is So Long a Letter by Maria Mabar. So Long a Letter by Maria Mabar. In that story or novel, there are two friends, Aisato and Mamodo, who exchanged letters. They exchanged letters between them. And in their letters, they expressed their um, experiences in their husband's house because they were married to two different polygamous homes where they had very nasty experiences. So they exchanged letters in the course of their conversation. And as the readers of that novel, you get to read their letters in your course of reading the novel. Okay, so apart from these ones, there are still other types of prose which fall under non-fiction. And then we have narrative techniques in prose. Narrative techniques in prose. In drama, we talk about dramatic techniques. Dramatic techniques in drama. And then in prose, we talk about narrative techniques. So narrative techniques to prose are like dramatic techniques to drama. Under narrative techniques or narrative devices, we have what is called point of view. Point of view, POV. Okay, there is the first person point of view. The first person point of view happens when a writer chooses to use the first person singular pronoun I or the first person plural pronoun we. If you are reading a story and the writer of that story begins with I, as if he or she is narrating his or her own experience. That is the first person point of view. The writer may also choose to use we, which is the plural form. That also has to do with the first person point of view. And for the first person point of view, in most cases, the story is autobiographical. That is why some novels are regarded as autobiographical novels, because you are reading someone's story written by the person. But in some cases, it is not necessarily the person's experience, but it is told from the first person point of view. And then we have second person point of view. There is a second person point of view. The second person point of view uses the second person singular and the second person plural pronoun, he. Okay. The second person point of view uses the second person singular and plural pronoun. And then we have the third person point of view. We have the third person point of view. The third person point of view uses the third person singular pronoun or the third person plural pronoun. And under the third person point of view, there is the omniscient point of view and the third person limited point of view. You need to take note of the difference between these two. And then um, characterization. Under characterization, we have different types of characters under drama. So it's still the same types, it's still the same set of characters. The round character, that is the all-rounder, the character that changes over time, the flat character, the one who is not perturbed, who is indifferent to the happenings around him or her. You have the foil, who plans and plots against other characters. You have the hero, who happens to be the key character, the major character. You have the anti-hero who fights against the hero, and so on. Then you have language. Language in prose, of course, has to do with the diction of the writer, the language that a particular writer adopts in the course of his writing. Some writers adopt some local languages in the course of their writing, while some strictly write in the English language. You know, it depends on you as a writer, what you have in mind and the message that you want to put across to your readers. And then for each work of prose that we read, you are expected to carry out what is called textual analysis. Textual analysis, where you discuss the various aspects of prose in that particular text, like we would be doing with the recommended text. On that textual analysis, we are expected to discuss the theme. We talked about theme the other time, that it simply means the main point or the central idea which a writer tries to put across to his readers. You have the plot, which happens to be the summary of the story, the summary of the major events in a story. And then you have setting. Setting has to do with the period of time and the place where events in the story happen. You have the socio-political context, where you relate events in the story to the socio-political happenings around you, to the socio-political situation of your own immediate environment. Okay? Mm, I think this is why we would be hanging it for prose. So let's quickly go to poetry and look at poetry and relevant terms that are used in poetry so that we can go into discussion of the recommended text. Okay. So with this, I take us to poetry. Poetry. Okay. These are the objectives that we are expected to cover under poetry. As we look at the objective, let me quickly go to poetry as a genre of literature. What is poetry? What is poetry? Of course, poetry has been defined by different writers from various points of view. Each person defines it as it appeals to him or her. Yeah. Poetry is a literary work of art that is written in lines and stanzas. A literary work of art that is written in lines and stanzas. We have Wordsworth define poetry as aesthetic creation in words. Another writer defines poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility and so on. No matter how you look at it, the fact is that poetry has to do with imagination and creation. To think about something, you imagine it, and then you create it, you put life into it, you present it in a very uh, beautiful way, you know, using relevant devices. So we have types of poems. Under poetry, we have types of poems. We have sonnets. We have sonnet, which is a poem of 14 rhymed lines. Sonnet is a poem of 14 rhymed lines. Okay? And then after sonnet, we have ode. Ode is a poem of praise that is directed to an object. A poem of praise that is directed to an object. We have lyrics. A lyrical poem is a poem that could be added with a musical instrument. Instrument is a lyrical poem that mourns the dead, a poem that mourns the dead, any poem of mourning that is an elegy. And then you have dirge. Dirge. Dirge is a song that mourns the dead, a song that mourns the dead. Okay. I want you to take note of the difference. There is a striking difference between dirge and elegy. While elegy is a poem that mourns the dead, dirge is a song that mourns the dead. And then we have eulogy. You also have to take care not to take eulogy for elegy. Eulogy is a poem of praise that is directed to someone, a poem of praise and admiration that is directed to someone. And you have the panegyric, which is also a poem of praise. Okay, this panegyric is very common with the Yoruba people. You know, they are very fond of singing and praising their king, or elders, you know, people who are respected in society, and so on. And then you have ballad, which is an old narrative poem. A ballad is an old narrative poem that tells a story. You have epic. Epic is a poem that celebrates heroic deeds. Any poem that celebrates heroic deeds is an epic poem. It's very common in the past. People that fought, warriors that went to war, they fought for their people and they brought victory back to their people. Songs were composed to honor them, you know, those are typical examples of epic. Other relevant terms that are used in poetry, you have the blank verse, when you read a poem and there is no rhyme scheme in that poem, so that the poem has what? It has a blank verse. There's no um, there's no rhyme scheme in that poem. It may have rhythm, but there's no rhyme. Okay. We also have what is called the octave. Octave. Octave is a poem of 8 rhymed lines. An octave is a poem of 8 rhymed lines. The septet. Septet is a poem of 7 rhymed lines. A poem of 7 rhymed lines. There is sextet. Sextet. Sextet is a poem of 6 rhymed lines. A poem of 6 rhymed lines. And then you have quatrain. A quatrain is a poem of 4 rhymed lines. A poem of 4 rhymed lines. You have a couplet. The couplet is a poem of 2 rhymed lines. A poem of 2 rhymed lines. Then in poetry, excuse me, in poetry, we have what is called enjambment or run-on line. Let me talk about that under poetic devices. Under poetic devices, we have what is called enjambment or run-on line. Enjambment or run-on line simply means when a line of poetry runs into another without any punctuation mark. I think that is intentional. Poets do that, you know, as a result of the poetic license which they have. As a poet, you have what is called poetic license. That is what your freedom of choice of words and structure too. As a poet, you have the freedom to choose words, to use words as you like, and then to structure your poem in a manner that suits you or that pleases you. Okay. Still under poetic devices, we have structure or form. Structure or form simply means the way a particular poem is presented. Some poets write their poem, everything is written in just one stanza. You may have a poem of 20, 30, 50 lines or more or less written in just one stanza. You may have a poem of 10 lines written in three different stanzas or two stanzas or more or less than that. That has to do with what? The structure. Okay. A poet may also choose to structure his poem in a manner that it has a rhyme scheme. Not all poems have rhyme patterns. Depends on the poem. And then you have imagery, imagery, imagery from imagination. Okay, most poems use imageries. Imageries are better visualized. You know, you imagine them, you think about them. They are usually symbols that poets use in their poems. The image um, of a coin could be used to portray a message. The image of a wicked person could be used to portray maybe a leader or something else. So imageries are pictorial, yeah, imaginary personages that are used by poets in their poems. And you have under sound, we have rhyme or reading, rhyme or reading. Rhyme simply means what? The correspondence in sound between one syllable in a line of poetry and another syllable in another line of poetry, rhyme. And reading is simply the beats. There could be reading without rhyme, okay? But rhyme cannot take place in the absence of reading, okay? Reading may happen without rhyme, but rhyme cannot take place in the absence of reading. And the two may also go together. And then repetition simply means when one or two words or even a line is repeated in a poem. When a word or a line is used more than once, that is repetition. Then there is pun. Pun has to do with what? A play upon words. I think this is better discussed as a literary term. That simply means they play upon words. And then you have onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia, that is sound imitation. When you use the sound of a thing to represent an idea, that is onomatopoeia. You have diction. Diction simply has to do with language, the language. Or a poet may choose to use a language that is high-handed, depending on the audience of the poem. A poet may choose to write in a very simple and self-explanatory language. It all depends on the poet. And you have the persona. The persona is a character uh, that a poet presents in his poem. Okay? The persona is simply the character that is presented in a work of poetry by the poet. Okay? And then under appreciation, we have thematic preoccupation. Thematic preoccupation. That simply means the major theme, the central message, okay, that the poet tries to put across to the readers or to the audience. Okay. For most of the poems that we have in the current syllabus, I think the thematic preoccupation there is leadership. We have racism and leadership. They are the dominant themes in most of the poems that we would be studying. And then we have sociopolitical relevance. Sociopolitical relevance. The poems that we are studying, how relevant are they to the sociopolitical situation of our country? How relevant are they? How can we relate them to what is happening in our social background, in our political background? And then style. Style is also similar to structure. That is any particular style at all that a poet chooses. Just like we have prose poetry. You may choose to write a poem in form of a prose, however you choose to write it. That is your style. I guess we would be stopping here for today. In our next lesson, we'll continue with discussion of the relevant texts. Discussion of the relevant text. We'll begin with prose. We would begin with prose and definitely African prose. African prose, definitely. Precisely Second Class Citizen by Buchi Emecheta. Second Class Citizen by Buchi Emecheta. So I would advise that you take your time to look at that novel, Second Class Citizen by Buchi Emecheta, before our next meeting so that you would flow with